Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening and welcome to the latest in our series of Doha debates, coming to you from the Gulf state of Qatar and sponsored by the Qatar Foundation. An independent report into the shocking violence earlier this year between opposition demonstrators and security forces in Bahrain was published last month, and it makes chilling reading. Prisoners were hooded, whipped, beaten and subjected to electric shocks. At least 5 died during the torture. Female prisoners were threatened with rape. Hundreds arrested, thousands sacked from their jobs, although most have been reinstated. One newspaper editor in the kingdom said people have seen hell. We've seen people killed, we've seen curfews, we know that people could be shot dead or disappear at a checkpoint. Society is crippled. The king said he too was shocked by the report, but accepted it, promising that laws would be changed and the guilty held to account. There would be compensation for victims, he said. Guilty verdicts on opposition members would be re-examined. But how credible are those promises? That's the question we ask you to address tonight. Our motion is, as always, controversial. This House has no confidence in Bahrain's promise to reform, and our speakers differ fundamentally on the issue. Speaking for the motion, Nabil Rajab. He's president of the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. He's also Deputy Secretary General of the International Federation for Human Rights, and this year won a Democracy Award from the Woodrow Wilson Center in the US. And with him, Christopher Davidson, reader in Middle East politics at the University of Durham in the UK. He's the author of a number of books on the region. His next one is called After the Sheikhs, The Coming Collapse of Gulf Monarchy. I should point out there's a question mark in that title. Against the motion, Khaled Al-Maina, editor-at-large of Arab News, the first English-language newspaper in Saudi Arabia. He travels and speaks widely and is a regular contributor to regional and international publications. And Abdullah Al-Darazi, he's a lecturer at the University of Bahrain College of Arts and a member of the Bahrain Human Rights Society. He was recently appointed to the government commission tasked with responding to last month's report into the violence. Ladies and gentlemen, that's our panel. So now let me ask Nabil Rajab to speak for the motion, please.
Thanks, everybody, and I'm happy to be here. As you all know, that my country witnessed an uprising in last February as we were inspired by the Arab Revolution and Arab Spring. Unfortunately, this uprising were met with a violent crackdown where at least 50 people were killed. Thousands of people were detained, systematically tortured, electrocuted, hanged, beaten, sexually harassed and raped. Thousands of people were fired from their work, from their school, from their university. We were fighting for the same demand that we were fighting for the past 80 years, 20s, 40s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Social justice, democracy, freedom. The same demand that we were always promised by the regime, that they will reform themselves, that things are going to be better. But always those promises were not met by the regime. Again, the same king who is talking today about the report, he's the same king who has in 2001 signed and talked in the newspaper saying that we're going to have a proper reform, we're going to have a parliament that has all power to legislate, we're going to have the same constitution that we had in the 70s. The king did not keep his promise. The same prime minister who has been there for the past 42 years, who is responsible for human rights violation, corruption, tenths of people were killed during his time. I myself don't think the same prime minister who is part of the problem or who is all the problem in Bahrain could in any way be part of the solution. I don't think that government capable or able to carry any kind of reform process. Thank you.
Okay, Nabil Rajab, thank you very much indeed. This is the king who ordered an independent report into what had taken place, which came up with massive, serious violations. He accepted it. He went public with it. He's had to endure the shame that went with that. And you don't think he's serious about this? Nobody's ever done this before. No government has ever done this before. Why not?
Was smart of him to distance himself from responsibility and distance the member of his family, as they were responsible for most of the violation, including
Why does it distance from him? He's accepted the report.
Because the United Nations is supposed to send a team of investigation. To prevent that team, he created his own commission. And you don't expect...
And what was wrong with the commission?
You don't expect to see the report of the commission will accuse the king who formed the commission.
What was wrong with the commission?
The
commission had highly respected people on the commission.
Did not talk about criminals.
It may not have used that word, but it came up with a lot of activities that violated international law, and it said so repeatedly,
I totally disagree. There are a lot of things positive in the report. But yes, it is not a reform process. The report talks about a human rights violation in February, March, and April. So this cannot be in any way a reform process, number one. Number two, there was supposed to be a human rights team coming to investigate in Bahrain. And with the request of my government, they stopped that team
Nabil Rajab, it uncovered serious systemic failures. It didn't just talk about the violence, it talked about the courts, it talked about the press, it talked about the way laws were used and abused, according to the commission. You don't think the king is serious after doing that? How could he possibly go back on his word, having gone so public?
You can't just talk about evaluate things from words or articles. You evaluate things from implementation, from practice.
Okay, so all cases related to death and torture have been referred to the prosecutor.
3 or 4 weeks, the report is out. The things is the same thing in the ground. Those people who are responsible for the crimes committed against humanity, they were awarded, they were upgraded, they were given a better job. Okay. The guy heading the security apparatus, today he's hitting a higher position.
Okay.
The violence in the street is the same going on. Yesterday, a child of 5 days old died because of the violence.
You made the point. Nabil Rajab, thank you very much indeed. Now could I ask, please, Khaled Al-Maina to speak against the motion, please.
Well, I think while we all agree that what happened in Bahrain was extremely sad and unfortunate and bloody, and it should never have happened, the reason I think there will be reforms is because the focus of the world is now on the Arab world. Forget the Arab Spring on the side, but also the focus on the GCC countries. At the same time, there's a new group of people in the GCC. No more is a one-way communication. There's a young group. 50% of the GCC population is under 35. They would really like to see and play a bigger role. Now, why I think reforms are there in the offing is because no longer can the leaders of the GCC or the authorities or those people in power or the police can afford to ignore these people. Reform is a process, not a remedy. And it's not an analgesic or you're giving an aspirin. It's a continuing process. And what happened in Bahrain was an eye-opener for other countries in the region, that you have to take people, their aspirations, no more. And they would always say a few years when I was growing up, a shuyukh abkhas. And now if you tell that to a young guy, he said, go to hell. We are abkhas. We know more. Abkhas means we know. So I really think young people will not take the nonsense they took before. At the same time, I think we have to give the Bahraini government some credibility. They have released prisoners. Yesterday I read that 70 or 80 of the players have been released. But I really think these are cosmetic things, and it should be enforced and enlarged so that all those people arrested and jailed should be released under a direct amnesty from the king. Once that is done, then I think the reform process would go ahead. But I really believe, and this is a gut feeling and many others, that nobody in the Gulf can afford to have repression or suppress people as was being done before in the Arab world.
Khaled Al-Maina, thank you very much indeed. You talk about new people in the GCC. There aren't new people in power in Bahrain. These are the same people who've allowed this culture of impunity that the report talks about, and previous cases of torture, which were highlighted by the UN as far back as 2003, as far back as the 90s. How come you have faith in these people? These are the same people who've kept this system going.
But I have faith in the young people, the people who are now using Twitter and using the Facebook and are taking no for an answer. They would really like to play a bigger role. Now, if anything happens...
But they can't play a bigger role when these people are still in power and torturing them, can they?
They cannot, but I think there are many ways to get the world attention to highlight on what happens. And I really believe it's a two-way street. I do agree that both sides have to give in. It's not... Reforms are not an emotional blackmail on the part of people, nor a threat. I think that those in power should go ahead. But there
look at the signs. I mean, what Nabil Rajab was talking about, the security minister, for instance. I mean, he's now been made, Secretary General of the Supreme Defense Council. He's now a security advisor to the king. This is the man who oversaw this, what the report calls this systematic abuse.
Yes, and I think this is unfortunate. I think really, whether it's the Bahraini...
It's a bit more than unfortunate, isn't it?
Whether it's a Bahraini government or others, they should really come up to see that there will be transparency and accountability.
But it's not happening, is it, if you go and promote the people who oversaw this abuse? What signal does that send to the rest of the world?
It gives a bad signal, I would agree, but at the same time I think that there should be more voices heard by the people themselves through a media or through an alternative media.
The media is biased. The report pointed it out. It said that the media in Bahrain is biased towards the government of Bahrain.
Well, all Arab media is biased, unfortunately, but what we can do is use other means, and there is an alternative media across the Arab world which young people are using, because nobody takes serious a media that ignores the aspiration of 80% of the people would be biased. But I think we have to find other ways to go ahead and get our point across.
You think the Saudis beginning to regret taking part in this human rights disaster by going in to assist the government of Bahrain?
Well, I mean, there were all kinds of ruses used, as we all know, the GCC Accord and the GCC Club and getting people across, whether right or wrong. But I really believe that Bahrain could have solved this issue in its own domestic yard by itself.
All right. Khaled Al-Maina, thank you very much indeed. Now could I ask, please, Christopher Davidson to speak for the motion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Crucially, what we should not forget is that the beginnings of the Bahrain protests on February 14th, 2011 began with very humble objectives, not to necessarily topple their long-serving king, nor to topple their much longer-serving unelected Prime Minister, who we shouldn't forget has been in power for nearly 40 years now, since Britain left in 1971. Instead, the objectives were simply to get the king and the ruling family to honour their promises made all the way back in 2001, where the king promised his people a return to the original constitution, to honour that constitution of the early 1970s and the short-lived parliament between 1973 and 1975. The people were not after the removal of the Al-Khalifa dynasty, just that the promises on those reforms would actually come good. As we've seen over the last decade, the emir has made himself a king, and the people have more or less got nothing. How has this been the case over the last decade? Well, the Bahraini ruling family have managed to construct a narrative which has been greatly accelerated in the wake of the violence over the last several months, a narrative constructed to persuade the region and the international community that there's some kind of Shia fifth column in Bahrain that, if they came to power through some kind of democratic movement, would end up as de facto agents of Iran. International community should be scared of that, because it would allow Iran a foothold very close to the onshore and offshore gas fields of the Gulf monarchies, and the world should stop this from happening.
Could you please wrap up?
What we've seen also several attempts to apply commissions, national dialogues, and of course the Bassiouni report, which my colleagues and opponents will discuss at length, I'm sure. I would argue this is just yet more window dressing, papering over cracks, short-term measures rather than genuine reform.
Okay.
Thank you.
Christopher Davidson, thank you very much indeed. The king, among other things, has done something that not only he has never done before, but no ruler in this region or elsewhere in the world has actually done, hired a commission to investigate itself. Surely that is a sign that things are changing. Isn't that the biggest sign of all?
I think it's desperate measures for desperate times. The king not only commissioned the report...
But that's a spin, isn't it? He did it, and he's lived with the consequences of it, and the shame of it, because there is a lot of shame.
Yes, absolutely. But we have to understand this perhaps in the context of royal factionalism within Bahrain. We're told a story, a spin in the rest of the world, that this is the king trying to offer something to his people, trying to initiate some genuine reform and dialogue. But instead, this may be a case of the king trying to get ammunition and leverage to distance himself from a certain part of the regime, namely the Prime Minister and the security
Distance
services.
himself or actually take it over, or actually control it?
Well, I'd be very surprised if he had the power and resources to actually take over.
Well, look at some of the steps that the report actually talked about.
None of the political prisoners have been released.
Release of 310 people. This is what the Bassioni report talked about. The transfer of all misdemeanor cases from the National Safety Court to ordinary courts, providing for the right of appeal to ordinary civilian courts. This is a change in Bahrain, isn't it?
Several hundred still in jail. The shadow report done by Human Rights Watch has highlighted
yes, but you can't
their
deny
plight.
that these are steps. These are concrete steps. We're talking about 3 weeks.
Plus, no
as
names
we're
are
sitting
mentioned.
here, 3 weeks since the report was
is very
published.
very vague in its findings, talking about the security establishment in extremely vague terms, which allows the king and the regime to very carefully distance themselves from actually removing key people.
Instead, what we've seen over the past few days, actually, doesn't it?
The individual cases, if we look what's happened to them, we find people have moved sideways or retired with generous packages that they've been
So you blame the report with highly respectable international figures on it?
I regard the report
including a former special rapporteur for torture?
I regard it as a very damp squib.
Really? Christopher Davidson, thank you very much indeed. Now could I please ask Abdullah Al-Darazi to speak against the motion?
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A king who was courage enough in 2001 to introduce a reform project, I believe that he is also courage enough now to introduce more reforms and the ability to have more reforms. The Bassioni report, the Biki was invited by the king, which is happened for the first time ever in this region, to investigate freely, and they had a free access, and we met them several times, the human rights societies, human rights organizations, government officials, and they have access to all files that what they need. Also, they did the report, and it was accepted. There were a lot of important recommendations in this report, which the king accepted and has started to practice and implement these recommendations. For example, they formed, let's say, the National Committee, which is recommendation number 1715, and this to monitor and follow up the government agencies of how for the implementations. Also, today the king he said that he accept and invite any opposition advisors to come as advisors to him to monitor the implementations of the recommendation and implementation of reform, and he said that it's a long-term project, may take 10 years in order to do so. Very important recommendations in the report is national reconciliation, which is 1725.
B
is important because that's what the country needs now, is to look forward, is for the future, is what's happened, to review all the atrocities and to punish those who have committed crimes against humanity and move forward.
Abdullah Al-Darazi, thank you very much indeed. Let me just take issue with you on one point. You said that the Commission got full access. The Commission said it didn't get full access. It got full access most of the time. It's not the same thing at all. We have had all the doors open to us. We were granted access to all the hospitals and prisons freely and without hindrance most of the time. That's a big reservation, isn't it?
Well, it's most of the time.
Well, it means more than 50%.
More
than half is most of the time.
It's most of the time is almost 70%.
Okay, but what we're seeing at the moment, if you believe that the government wants to change, it's serious about reform, we're still seeing them talking about the same things. Prosecutors are still producing evidence in court that was discredited by the Commission, including the claims that there were guns at the Salmania medical complex, which the report rejected. That's still being talked about.
This is something that should be, for example, wrong, done by the government. Medic's case is a thorn now in the government throat.
But they're still repeating it, aren't they? They're going on repeating discredited information.
That's why the National Committee is to work on these things. Now they started on a recommendation.
But this isn't a reason to have faith in them, is it? It's
no reason. The question is the ability, and the ability is there. The ability started
Yeah, but
today,
it's not
for
being
example.
exercised, is it? They're still talking about
it is
Iran. They're still talking about Iran
Yeah.
as being part of the... That too was discredited by the report.
Of
the
course,
report
the
found no
report
evidence
found no
of
evidence,
Iran's
and
involvement.
that was accepted.
So this it goes on and on, talking about the same discredited information.
I know that there are problems in the government, and they need radical change in also phases. That is, we have to accept.
But these
that.
are not
And
encouraging signs, are they? They're not
encouraging signs, but
signs.
it takes time. It will be, I'm sure, that once the Crown Prince, for example, also is a serious person for reform.
It takes will, doesn't it? More
of
than
course,
time.
political will.
Abdullah Al-Darazi, we're going to take some questions now. Let me just remind the audience of the motion. This House has no confidence in Bahrain's promise to reform. We're going to take your questions now. Okay, we'll take a question from the lady in the front row.
Thank you very much. I'm from Bahrain. My question is, isn't it very sad, Mr. Rajab, that during the past 10 years, the government has shown true initiative to put reform on track, and in that phase we'll get stubborn people trying not to respond to that reform. For example, opposition parties not participating in the name of religion in elections earlier in the middle of 2002, and then afterwards seizing that opportunity to get into the parliament and then trying to discredit the credibility of His Majesty the King.
Okay, let him answer that.
Yes.
Well, I didn't know about the opposition boycotting the election on the basis of religion. That's the first time I ever heard it. But the fact is that the king have promised people to restore and to activate the constitution and the parliament that we have in the 70s. But the king did not keep his promise. There was a reason for the opposition to boycott, because the king, and it's not the first time, he promised of reforms, and when things cool down, the man, he goes back on all his promises. This was the actual problem.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the lady in red. Lady in red.
Hi, I'm from Bahrain, and I was one of the youth activists who took part in the protest since February the 14th. We partly did so because we no longer want to be treated as subjects. We want to be treated as equal citizens with full citizenship rights and a full constitutional system. In doing that, my husband was arrested in April. He's been in jail for 8 months, just to silence activists like me. So I
Can we come to a question, please?
My question to Abdullah Darazi, you know there are 700 people in prison today, political prisoners in prison today. They're the ones that this report talks about. They were subjected to systematic torture. There has been no initiative to release them. The king has not promised to release them. My husband calls me and asks me, why am I still in jail and my torturer gets promoted? Do you think I trust a government that spends millions on PR to appear to be good to the West instead of actually being good and actually promising reforms? There isn't even a promise of reform.
Okay,
There's no promise of political reconciliation.
Let's allow Abdullah Al-Darazi to answer that.
Of course, holding people in prison and torture, nobody accepts that at all. That's the principle. The report has pointed out...
How can you trust a government that does that?
Can I finish my answer, please?
Please, let him speak.
Can I finish my answer?
Let him speak.
Nobody, a human being, will accept any mistreatment for what happened for those prisoners. Now, do we want to go forward for a better future for all Bahrainis? Or are we going to, to just talk and talk and talk? We have to take actions. If we want to take actions, we have to look at experiences in the world. South Africa, for example. South Africa has applied
let's just stay with Bahrain, shall we? Let's just stay
Morocco,
with Bahrain.
Chile, Argentina, all other places.
Spring.
Now,
let me
finish. Okay, let me finish. So, for example, I am with dropping all the charges. The government should really drop all the charges, should release all prisoners without discrimination, should reinstate everybody who lost their jobs. Not just reinstated, to go back to their original job.
Do any of the things that you've said convince you?
No, of course not, because there are more promises, there are more should. Where's the action? Why doesn't he open the jails? We're living off a stroke of a pen of the king. We have to decide whether he wakes up and decides to release everyone in prison, or he goes to bed deciding, well, not today, maybe tomorrow. I don't want to live off off the whim of a king that just decides to jail people, to torture people, and then what does he do? He promises more commissions to look into this, which you're participating in, instead of actually doing the action.
Okay, all right.
There is no excuse for not doing any of this stuff.
Do you want the country to go forward or backward?
No, she wants people released from jail.
That's what I want. I want to myself.
So why isn't it happening? You have faith in the king.
I'm sure it will happen. I'm sure it will happen soon.
When?
That's the promise. Because of the committee now, National Committee, it has been working on that. We started with a recommendation related to the restated of the people back to their work, and this will be done within 10 days.
So you're promising my husband will be out of jail in a week?
I'm not.
He's been sentenced to 3 years in a military court.
I said that there is serious reforms coming. There are serious
people. That the people of
there are
Bahrain
serious
do not know.
people who are in the government who wants to change, who wants to go forward for the country, to have a better Bahrain of before 14 February.
Okay, all right.
And this we need support from all of us.
We've heard that point. I'm going to take a question from the gentleman at the back over there. Yes, you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm a South African journalist based in Qatar. And we've heard reports allegations that even if Bahrain wanted to reform, Saudi Arabia would not allow it to happen. Any response?
Khaled Al-Maina, straight to your door.
Well, tomorrow if the lights go out in London, they will blame Saudi Arabia. But in that, I think this overhype of the Saudis interfering, I think by saying that you demean the government of Bahrain and the King of Bahrain and others. I mean, Bahrain is not a puppet. It has been in the forefront. It is a very active country. I doubt that, because the Saudis themselves are reforming. If you see the last 5-6 years, the Saudi Arabia I knew 10 years ago has totally changed, with women coming in and all. I'm not saying that it's going with the speed that I would like to for it to go, or with other young people.
What's changed in Saudi Arabia?
Well, in the sense that there has been a great focus on the women's issues. The women now are going to go into parliament in the next session.
They still can't drive.
Another good question,
Not that I want to go on about driving.
No, but this is, again, a campaign that should be decided by the women, and there are people who would really like to go ahead. Some of them have been detained for a few days because they drove. But I think a lot of these root causes can be really, the solution lies with the people themselves. But I do believe that there has been some change.
Nabil Rajab, you want to come in here?
I think one of the most dangerous things in the Arab Spring or Arab Revolution are the Saudis now. They're revolting back, and they're fighting all the revolution, all the movement, all the democratic movement. I think you, as a youth movement around the Arab Spring, you have to be aware of that. They are either fighting the revolution or hijacking the revolution, as I could see indication right now in Egypt.
Well, even the Saudis believe there can be no stability if the majority is dissatisfied. So if these actions sort of dissatisfy people in the Gulf, then it's bad for Saudi Arabia too. I am saying it, with all the solemnity at my disposal. I mean, I don't think so. The Saudi role is always over-magnified about the interference. We have our own issues. We have 3 or 4 major issues: youth, the environment, population, women's issues. I doubt that there are people sitting and plotting and taking a pen and saying, today we do this in Bahrain, tomorrow we go to the UAE.
The report didn't find any evidence of Saudi involvement in the abuses, did it?
I mean, the fact that people fighting for democracy and social justice, and you go and invite other army to come in, whether they were involved directly or indirectly, it's a shame that you send your troops to fight a peaceful protest. People have no arm. People have even no knife. That itself, it's something that is going to be in the history, black spot in the history of the GCC forces headed by the Saudis.
But Nabil, it was not the Saudis who invited. It was the whole GCC union.
The Saudis and the Emiratis.
Well, I mean, now you added one more. You can add a third. Yes. But it was not the Saudis. As I said, believe you me, and I know that there are no people plotting and saying today we do this in Bahrain or tomorrow we do that.
How do you know?
So the GCC forces made not to go interfere in internal politics of any country, but to defend the external threat. And there was no single external threat in Bahrain. And now Mr. Bassiouni said that there was no threat from Iran as they try to present it. And as we've been victims of saying Iran, Bahrain, Iran, Shias, Iran, Bahrain, they've been playing with this card for many, many years. And we are paying the price. So there was no external threat. There was no reason for the Saudi to come to Bahrain and to take part in the crackdown and killing the people.
But let me put it this way. The other GCC countries would have flatly refused. As they have, the UAE has not joined the economic union. The Omanis don't want a unified currency. So they could have said, look, Mr. Saudis, we don't want to go in with you. You go ahead. They could have said that.
Okay, Christopher Davidson.
Well, I think with regards to the Saudi angle, Saudi Arabia is fast becoming the major counter-revolutionary force in the region. It's still a country with subsidies and some regional clout. I think Bahrain and elsewhere in the Gulf, where there have been protests and riots, Oman, for example, where there's been a Saudi aid rescue package, represent a real existential threat to Gulf monarchy. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates to some extent, want to portray the Arab Spring as something connected to Arab Republic authoritarianism and something that for some reason cannot take root in a traditional monarchy. Bahrain, of course, is a traditional monarchy where the ruling family look and speak the same as the other Gulf monarchs, but of course it's now a resource-rich one. So a collapse of monarchy in Bahrain, I would argue, would seemingly break the spell or the illusion of invincibility of Gulf monarchy in the region.
Okay, gentleman in the front row, we'll take a question from you, please.
Hello, I'm from Qatar, and my question for Mr. Abdullah. So first, you exhibited your disagreement with the violation and the abuse of the protesters. And then you went on about how the government made promises and to reform. And my question is, don't you think that before the government makes these promises, don't you think that they should start by stopping these violations?
Okay. Of course, they should. I agree with you that...
Did they?
Pardon, let me finish. I want to finish that. Of course they do. Unfortunately, it's still going on. And that is what exactly we mean, that the report itself mentioned these things. And in recommendations related to those who are responsible for torture, for use of excessive force, and so on, should be made accountable.
Isn't the reason that they don't stop it is they have no intention of stopping it?
I don't think they have no intention. There is intention, there is faith that there will be reforms, and such violence is not acceptable by all means by anybody.
Okay,
and that's important.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said don't focus on what was written in the report, but what's been practiced. At least 10 people have died so far since the Bassiouni Commission were in Bahrain. Last night, one child, 5 days old, she was killed by a tear gas. I was speaking in seminar 2 nights ago in Bahrain, and later half an hour my house were fired with tear gas. I'm urging you to go to YouTube and see how my house is being targeted. The problem is that, as the colleague said, yes, there are members of ruling family committing crimes. This is the problem.
Okay, gentleman up there, you sir, in the red, in the pullover.
Hi, I'm from Saudi Arabia, living in Bahrain. And my question is for Mr. Nabil Rajab. I just want to know what exactly is it that the opposition wants at this point? Because I walk out of my house and I see protesters yelling, death to Al-Khalifa, down with Al-Khalifa. And I walk into the street and I see them throwing burning tires and oil in the street and all of this commotion. I do see violence. You say violence doesn't exist. I see violence all the time on the side of the protesters.
Okay, you made the point. Let him answer that.
Okay. I wouldn't say, you don't take my opinion, but take opinion of all international human rights organizations who talked about the revolution and said it's the most violence. I think 14th of February, people came out revolting. They were not trying to overthrow the regime. They were saying that we want elected government, we want parliament that has power, we want to have an end to the sectarian discrimination, we want to have into the corruption. We want the prime minister to step down. You can't. There is no civilized country that has prime minister for 42 years. I mean, that you can't believe it. How can you reform when you cannot remove the prime minister and have another one? How can you reform? This is what I'm saying. And this is a very legitimate right people fighting for, guaranteed by all international conventions. There is nothing strange. People are calling for the same thing most of you have in your own country. Freedom, liberty, social justice, democracy. Our right to fight, and our right to have democracy, and our right to live in justice.
Okay.
That's all what we want.
Abdullah Al-Darazi, do you want to comment on this?
Well, nobody is with violence. Well, it comes from any person, or from either from the side of the protesters or from the side of the police. And if protesters have, always, and I experienced with you personally and so on, most of the time they are peaceful.
Nabil Rajab raises a specific point about the Prime Minister, 42 years. This doesn't happen, he says, in a civilized country. Should the Prime Minister go? Is this what you'll recommend?
I believe yes.
He should go.
I believe yes. I believe it's the time that the people should have, if there are serious reforms going on, if there is a serious reform for the future, there should be an appointed government.
And has the king got the will and the power to dismiss him?
You can ask him himself.
What do you think? I'm asking you. You're on the commission. What do you think?
He can.
Well, I think there is a possibility. There is a possibility that this may happen. And I think for
That doesn't
future
sound-
change,
that doesn't sound
for a
very
future
certain,
of
does it?
Bahrain, for a future for better, it may happen.
You don't sound very certain of it. Do you want to come back on what you heard from Nabil Rajab about
I just wanted
what
to
the
add-
opposition wants?
Yeah, I just want to add that, so they have started somewhere. I mean, the government has started. There has been the opportunity for national dialogue, which many of the protesters, I think, of the political parties have rejected. And then there was, in the commission, we've seen that there have been funds for repairing the damage that was caused. There is a committee working on rebuilding the places of worship. There are currently 6 cases in which police officers are being prosecuted after what's being happened. So there are changes.
Okay,
It is
Chris
happening.
Davidson. Let's bring Chris Davidson in on
Yeah,
this.
just 2 quick points. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, we have to ask ourselves why the protesters are now saying down with Khalifa. The protests back in February didn't start like that. They started as genuine efforts to try and get already promised reforms being enacted that were a decade late. So we have to ask ourselves why the protesters have gotten as far as this, and clearly it's the repression, it's the collective punishment of Shia, it's the destruction of Shia mosques as outlined in the Basuni report, etc. The other thing I think we need to be a little careful about, the opposition in particular, is that if the Prime Minister is removed now after 40 years, that alone cannot be regarded as a victory. That could well be the regime's face-saving mechanism. We've seen this in Kuwait with the dismissal of, the preemptive dismissal of Sheikh Nasser recently, perhaps even in Egypt as well, for Mubarak's removal in the face of a military junta. So we have to be very careful as viewing the removal of one man as being the end of a particular regime.
Who has a question for this side? Gentleman in the front row. Your question is for these side, against the motion.
I'm from Bahrain. Question for Drazi. Question, it seems like we have 2 governments in Bahrain. Here we have a report condemning the government and have specific actions to be taken. It's been a few weeks, nothing has been done. Yes, there are a few things that have been done, which is good. I'm not arguing that. On the second point, if we walk in the streets today, and I'm reading, I'm seeing online, there's a lot of activities. The same activities from the government and also from the other side are happening in the street today. So who's ruling? Who's in charge here? That's the question.
Who's in charge? I think the king is in charge.
I don't think so.
I think the king is in charge.
People,
and the crown prince is in charge.
And your evidence for saying that is what?
My evidence is he's the head of a state. As I said earlier, I mean, there are in any government, in any political party, in any royal family, there are people who differ. What I said is the most important thing is that we have to have a lawful state. That no discrimination, that's the future. Everybody is equal. Either comes from your family, royal family, or comes from an ordinary person, or from the layman from the street. They should have, in front of the law, they should be the same. There is no discrimination.
Let him come back.
Okay.
I totally agree with you on that. I mean, we all believe in that. What I also see, we have a commission on your table right now, needs to be addressed. Action needs to be taken. So her husband and everyone else. Okay, believe it or not, there's people in this room were fired.
I was fired for 8 months.
You were fired too, as far as I know. We need to take actions.
I lost my job for 8 months as a lecturer at the University of Bahrain because the Secretary General for Human Rights, because participating
because of your voice.
And going to the appeal per square, and so on. So, do I have to sit and cry? Do I have to sit and say, this will never happen, this is always bad, or do I have to go and fight forward?
I want to ask the question of whether
the water is spilled.
Just a question that you raised about living in a lawful state. Do you live in a lawful state in Bahrain?
No.
No.
At the moment, no. I agree with you.
No. Let's be realistic.
At the moment,
since 2001, no. There's a lot of talks left and right. In reality, the crises have shown that we never lived, and we definitely never lived in the last 10 months or so, and God knows how long it's going to take.
What would convince you that the government is serious about reforming?
Take what we have in the report today, take these actions, the recommendations, as of tomorrow, okay? And then I think the opposition or everyone else will sit down and listen. So some indications that the government is, at least towards, they have the intention to take actions. What we're seeing today, we have a report, a lot of talks, we have a committee that you're part of, but we also see a lot of actions, maternity industry hitting people.
Khaled Al-Maini, let me bring you in here. A government has to earn trust, doesn't it?
It's got to work hard to earn that trust because of what happened in the past.
So you don't think it's earned it yet, do you?
It's not earned it because the journey hasn't even commenced with this report. And as the gentleman said, I mean, they have to start implementing. Enough talk is going on. And some of the people clap when something is said against Nabil. But I don't think so. I think there's a genuine grievance in Bahrain, in other Arab countries, in GCC countries, and there should be a dialogue, a straight dialogue, or an equal and leveled playing field.
But you have confidence in Bahrain's promise to reform, even though you don't think they've earned the trust of the people.
Reform is survival. Reform is that ongoing process. It's not, as I said earlier, an analgesic. I mean, they have to go ahead because you can't keep the whole country in turbulence with what's going on. I mean, it's harming people, it's killing innocent people. 5-day-old kids are being killed, suffocated. So there's no alternative to reforms.
All right, gentleman there in the front row. You are from?
Tunisia. Okay. At last. My question to the honorable gentleman on the proposition side is, first, within the context of the Arab Spring uprisings and the overthrow of the dictators one after the other, time has been a very crucial factor. There is a time in this conjuncture where the leader has to grab the moment, and if he misses that, he's done. Okay? According to you, how much time does the Bahraini king enjoy, and do you think he has already run out of time and that his days are just counted?
Well, I think in the case of Bahrain, the king has demonstrated remarkable resilience. He's used a range of measures over the last several months, which are unprecedented in the Gulf, including inviting foreign troops onto your soil, having an independent commission into human rights, etc. I still see this as crack-covering reforms to buy more time. What makes Bahrain so different, not only that it's taken these measures, it's managed to identify that moment and survive the crucial one back in March, but also that its geopolitical situation, surrounded by other Gulf monarchies that do not want to let it fall, plus, of course, its proximity to Iran and some of the major oil fields mean we're not going to get the same kind of international condemnation of the Bahraini regime anytime soon, nor the same pressure to intervene, impose sanctions, etc., no matter what the Bahraini regime actually does.
Okay.
And as we've discussed at length, the per capita violence in Bahrain is probably much higher than in Tunisia, Egypt, etc.
Okay, Khaled Al-Maini, how long does the king have? What are we talking about? Weeks? Months?
No, I think, as I said, it all depends on what the Bahraini authorities do. I truly believe...
Yeah, but how long have they got to do it in? How urgent is it?
Well, I mean, to give you a precise answer, I think the next 2 or 3 months are extremely crucial, provided these 2 or 3 months also go without bloodshed. So it's important the next 2 or 3 months, the implementation of this commission, the dialogue, and on the other side also the opposition will come and sit with them.
Okay, question you wanted to
rephrase my question is, what drastic measures does the king has to take fundamentally in order to save his crown?
Abdul Razi.
We have a good king. We trust the king. We trust the crown prince. We believe that he will do a lot of reforms. Nobody, the majority of the opposition, they don't call for the topple of the king at the moment.
Okay, all right. Before we go to the vote, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask each of the panelists just to give one final sentence about their views, hoping to sway you one way or the other, and then we'll go to the vote. Let's start with you. Just one sentence, and we'll work our way around the semicircle.
The government who's been there for the past 42 years committing crimes and violations till last night, killing people, I don't think it's capable to conduct or to go in a process of reform.
Chris Davidson, one sentence, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's insulting to our intelligence to expect the same small ruling clique in Bahrain to be capable of implementing reform if it's already seen fit to deploy mercenaries, destroy places of worship, and most barbarically destroy the Lulu roundabout as a symbol of putting down the opposition.
Okay, Abdullah Abdul-Razi, one sentence, please.
I believe that looking for the future, for a better Bahrain for everybody, for a lawful state, the government and the Bahrain, there are people who are able, and I have confidence that they will move the country forward.
Khaled Amain.
Well, I think the events of this year was a clarion call for the government to shape up and try to do reforms and get on and have a dialogue, because, as I said, there is absolutely no alternative to reform and people participation.
Okay, all right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to vote on the motion that this House has no confidence in Bahrain's promise to reform. Let me just explain to you how the voting machines work. If you want to vote for the motion, that is the side represented by those on my right, you're going to need to press button 1. If you want to vote against the motion, the side represented by those on my left, it's button 2. Whichever button you want to press, please do it now. All right, there's the result. 78% for the motion, 22% against. The motion has been resoundingly carried. All it remains for me to do is to thank our distinguished panelists. Thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you to you, the audience. The Doha debates will be back again in a month's time. Till then, from all of us on the team, have a safe journey home. Good night. Thanks for coming. Good night.